Welcome, sleepy detectives, to a quiet corner of the night where forgotten echoes often guide the way to truth. Tonight, we drift through tales of silent breakthroughs where the most overlooked details, the most subtle shifts in the passage of time, brought clarity to cases long cloaked in shadow. We explore those moments when justice, like a persistent whisper, finally found its voice, gently revealing the answers that once seemed lost to the currents of history. Settle in as we explore the quiet persistence of truth, unveiling mysteries that waited patiently for their moment in the light. Our first journey takes us to the tranquil suburban landscapes of Arizona, where a young life was tragically cut short and the answers remained elusive for far too long. This is the story of Colleen Slemmer, a story that, for years, seemed destined to remain unsolved until the quiet work of unseen clues began to unfold. It was the month of February, in the year 1990. Colleen Slemmer, a vibrant and caring young woman of 18, had recently moved from her home in South Dakota to the sunny state of Arizona. She was living with friends, eager to embrace a new chapter, attending Scottsdale Community College. Colleen was known for her kindness, her cheerful disposition, and her readiness to help others. She had a gentle spirit, and a bright future seemed to stretch endlessly before her. Her mood was driven by a desire for independence, a yearning for new experiences, and the appeal of the warmer climate. She quickly adapted to her new surroundings, making friends and immersing herself in her studies. Her days were filled with the usual routines of a college student, balanced with social activities. She often spoke to her family back home, sharing her enthusiasm for her new life. On the morning of February 10th, 1990, Colleen was scheduled to meet a friend at a local park in Scottsdale. She never arrived. Concern grew quickly among her friends, who knew Colleen to be dependable. When she failed to return home and could not be reached, the alarm was raised. An immediate search began, driven by a desperate hope to find her safe. Friends and housemates retraced her last known steps, called everyone she knew, and contacted local authorities. The initial hours of a missing person investigation are always critical. Imbued with a frantic energy as possibilities are weighed and leads are pursued. Flyers were prepared, and the local community began to hear of Colleen's disappearance. The initial police response involved canvassing the areas she was known to frequent, questioning her acquaintances, and checking local hospitals. However, no immediate sign of Colleen or her whereabouts came to light. The hopeful search slowly began to transform into a more somber and urgent inquiry. Tragically, just a few days later, on February 12th, Colleen's remains were discovered in a remote desert area outside of Scottsdale. The discovery sent a chill through the community. Her passing was clearly not natural, and the circumstances pointed to a violent act. The serene desert landscape, usually a place of quiet beauty, now held a somber secret. The site of the discovery was rugged and isolated, a place not easily stumbled upon by chance. This suggested that whoever left her there had some familiarity with the area, or intentionally chose a secluded spot to avoid detection. The immediate area around the discovery was carefully secured by law enforcement, establishing a perimeter to preserve any potential evidence. Quiet beauty of the desert gave way to the methodical and solemn work of crime scene investigators. Investigators arrived at the scene, their hopes high for immediate clues. They meticulously processed the area, searching for anything that could lead them to Colleen's killer. They collected various pieces of evidence, but at that time none seemed to offer an immediate path forward. The initial investigation, despite earnest efforts, struggled to gain significant traction. There were no obvious witnesses, no clear suspects, and the remote location offered little in the way of immediate answers. The case grew cold, a heavy weight on the hearts of those who knew Colleen, and a perplexing mystery for law enforcement. The desert winds whispered secrets, but for many years they remained unheard. The initial forensic examination provided some details about the nature of the violence Colleen endured, but no immediate breakthrough in terms of identifying a perpetrator. The evidence collected included samples that might contain DNA, but the technology for DNA profiling was still in its nascent stages in 1990. What limited testing was available at the time often yielded inconclusive results, or simply did not have the databases to match against. Physical evidence, such as fibers or hairs, were collected, but without a suspect to compare them to, their immediate value was limited. The lack of immediate leads meant investigators had to cast a wide net, interviewing anyone who had known Colleen, from her new friends in Arizona to her family back in South Dakota. They sought to understand her recent activities, any new relationships, or any conflicts she might have had. They compiled lists of individuals who had been in contact with her, attempting to build a comprehensive picture of her life in Arizona. Every lead, no matter how small, was pursued, but each seemed to lead to a dead end. The initial shock gave way to a persistent, gnawing uncertainty. The community felt the ripple effects of the unsolved case. Parents worried, friends grieved, and the shadow of the unknown lingered over Scottsdale. Without a clear direction, the investigation relied heavily on traditional police work, which, in the absence of strong physical evidence or eyewitness accounts, proved challenging. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and the initial fervor of the investigation began to wane as other cases demanded attention. Colleen Slemmer's case became another entry in the growing list of unsolved mysteries. Years passed, and the quiet grief endured by Colleen's family and friends was compounded by the absence of justice. The case files, once actively reviewed, slowly gathered dust. Yet, within the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office, the commitment to cold cases remained, a quiet promise kept in the face of time's relentless march. Detectives assigned to cold cases understood the unique challenges. Witnesses moved away, memories faded, and the trail of evidence grew fainter with each passing year. But they also knew that time itself could sometimes be an ally, bringing new perspectives, new technologies, or even a change of heart in those who held secrets. Periodically, the Slemmer file would be pulled, reviewed, and perhaps a new piece of information, though seemingly minor, would be cross-referenced, or an old piece of evidence re-examined. These reviews were often painstaking, involving the rereading of every report, every interview transcript, searching for an overlooked detail, a misplaced word, or a subtle inconsistency that might have been missed in the initial chaos of the active investigation. The determination to find answers for Colleen remained, a steady, unwavering light in the quiet of the cold case unit. The silent breakthrough in Colleen Slemmer's case arrived through the quiet evolution of forensic science. As the years progressed into the 2000s, DNA technology had advanced dramatically. What was once a nascent and limited tool in 1990 had become a powerful identifier. In the year 2002, more than a decade after Colleen's tragic passing, the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office decided to re-examine the evidence collected from the original crime scene. The hope was that modern DNA analysis could finally provide the clarity that earlier methods could not. Specifically, forensic scientists focused on biological samples that had been carefully preserved from the scene. These samples, which might have appeared insignificant or yielded no results in the early 1990s, now held immense potential. The process was meticulous. The preserved evidence was carefully retrieved from storage, handled with extreme care to prevent contamination. Scientific protocols were strictly followed to extract any viable genetic material. When the new DNA analysis was completed, it yielded a profile. This profile was then entered into CODIS, the Combined DNA Index System, a national database of DNA profiles from unsolved crimes and known offenders. This was the quiet, methodical work of science, progressing unseen for years, now ready to speak. The entry into CODIS was a moment of quiet anticipation for the cold case detectives. The database was a repository of countless genetic blueprints, a digital tapestry that could, with a silent flash, connect a past crime to a current individual. And indeed, the system produced a match. The DNA profile from Colleen Slemmer's case was identified as belonging to an individual named John Jeffrey Ghosh. This was the moment the long-held secret of the desert began to unravel. Ghosh was not previously a prominent suspect in the original 1990 investigation. He had been known to law enforcement for other unrelated matters, which is how his DNA profile came to be in the CODIS system. This match was the silent breakthrough, a technological revelation that bridged the gap of time and anonymity, finally giving investigators a clear direction. With the DNA match providing this critical new lead, detectives began to build a case against John Ghosh. They meticulously revisited the original investigation files, cross-referencing Ghosh's known activities and associations around 1990 with any information related to Colleen Slemmer. They looked for any subtle connections that might have been overlooked, any tangential relationship that now, with the benefit of hindsight and a DNA link, suddenly gained significance. They discovered that Ghosh had, in fact, been acquainted with Colleen through mutual friends. This was not a random act of violence by a stranger. There was a connection, however slight, that had simply not been obvious or relevant enough to pursue in the initial chaotic phase of the original investigation. The discovery of this existing, though peripheral, relationship helped to strengthen the case, providing a narrative context for the forensic evidence. It transformed a perplexing cold case into an active investigation with a clear target. The evidence was now compelling. The DNA linked John Jeffrey Ghosh directly to the scene and to Colleen Slemmer. This silent, undeniable truth, painstakingly preserved and then dramatically revealed by advancing technology, formed the cornerstone of the prosecution's argument. In the year 2006, scheme years after Colleen's passing, John Jeffrey Ghosh was arrested and charged in connection with her death. The arrest brought a wave of emotions for Colleen's family, relief that answers were finally emerging, but also a renewed sense of grief for the future that was stolen from her. The legal process, though lengthy and arduous, moved forward. The court proceedings were a testament to the quiet persistence of justice, a demonstration that some truths, no matter how long they lie dormant, will eventually emerge. The scientific evidence, meticulously presented, left little room for doubt. In the year 2007, John Jeffrey Ghosh was found guilty of the charges related to Colleen Slemmer's passing. He received a sentence that reflected the gravity of his actions. This conviction marked the end of a long and painful chapter for Colleen's family and friends. It was a victory for the cold case detectives who had never given up, and a powerful demonstration of how advancements in forensic science can quietly rewrite the ending of a long, unsolved story. The case of Colleen Slemmer is a poignant reminder that even when leads grow cold and time seems to obscure the truth, the subtle threads of evidence, patiently waiting, can ultimately guide justice to its destination. It illustrates how the unseen work of preserving evidence, coupled with the quiet, relentless progress of scientific innovation, can lead to breakthroughs that once seemed impossible. Colleen's story now serves as a testament to the enduring hope that no case is ever truly forgotten, and that even the smallest, most unnoticed clues can carry the weight of an entire truth, eventually bring peace to those left in sorrow. Our next story takes us across the Atlantic to the quiet, pastoral landscapes of Northumberland, England, where a shocking discovery plunged a serene community into a prolonged search for answers. This is the enduring mystery of Evelyn Foster, a case that captivated a nation and remained unresolved for decades, a testament to how even in a seemingly quiet countryside, truth can remain elusive, waiting for a silent shift in perspective. It was the month of January, in the year 1931. Evelyn Foster, a bright and independent 22-year-old, lived in the village of Sunnyside near Chester Street. She was a valued member of her community, known for her cheerful nature and her dedication to her family. Evelyn worked as a taxi driver, a profession that, especially for a woman in that era, spoke to her adventurous spirit and capability. She regularly transported passengers across the rolling hills and winding roads of the Northumberland countryside, a familiar figure in her blue Austin taxi. Her days were filled with the routine of her work. Evelyn was dependable, and her movements were often predictable, a comforting constant in the lives of those who relied on her service. On the evening of January 6, 1931, Evelyn received a call for a fare. She was to pick up a passenger from the White Lead Works in Berkeley and transport them to the town of Consett. This was a relatively common route, and Evelyn set out as she always did, perhaps anticipating a straightforward journey. She was last seen driving her taxi, with a passenger beside her, heading into the deepening twilight. The hours passed, and Evelyn did not return home. Her family, increasingly anxious, made inquiries, but no one had seen her or her taxi since her departure with the mysterious passenger. The local police were contacted, and a missing persons alarm was raised. The initial search was frantic, focusing on the route Evelyn was expected to have taken and the surrounding rural areas. The cold January night, with its long shadows and often deserted roads, only heightened the anxiety surrounding her disappearance. Tragically, just a few hours later, in the early morning of January 7th, Evelyn's taxi was discovered abandoned on a remote lane near the village of Wolfklug, not far from the town of Consett. The vehicle was found parked by the roadside, engines still running, headlights on, and the doors ajar. This chilling scene immediately suggested foul play. A short distance away, a horrifying discovery was made. Evelyn Foster's individual was found lying by the side of the road. Her passing was clearly the result of a violent act, and the circumstances surrounding her discovery painted a grim picture. Quiet, isolated lane, usually traversed only by local farmers or the occasional passing vehicle, now bore witness to a profound tragedy. The serene, frost-kissed landscape, with its bare trees and slumbering fields, held a terrible secret, shattering the peace of the Northumberland countryside. Investigators quickly arrived at the scene. The immediate focus was to meticulously process the taxi and the surrounding area for any clues. The condition of the vehicle and the scene where Evelyn was found were carefully documented. Every detail, no matter how small, was examined. Footprints in the soft earth, tire marks, any discarded items. Forensic techniques of the era, though not as advanced as today, were employed with diligence. The internal condition of the taxi was carefully noted. There was evidence within the vehicle that indicated a struggle, suggesting that a violent confrontation had occurred inside the confines of the small car. Items were collected for analysis, including any fibers, hairs, or fingerprints that could be lifted. The remote location of the discovery made the initial stages of the investigation particularly challenging. There were no immediate witnesses, and the chances of someone having driven past at the precise moment of the incident were slim. This forced investigators to rely heavily on the physical evidence found at the scene and on the accounts of those who last saw Evelyn. The initial investigation launched a massive police effort, encompassing widespread interviews and a painstaking search of the surrounding area. Police interviewed hundreds of individuals, including Evelyn's friends, family, and anyone who might have seen her or her taxi on the night of January 6th. The mysterious passenger she picked up from the White Lead Works became the central focus of their inquiries. Descriptions were sought, however vague, and attempts were made to trace anyone who might have been at the works or in the area at the time of the call. The public was urged to come forward with any information, and the case quickly garnered significant national attention due to the brutal nature of the act and the victim being a young woman in an unusual profession for the time. Despite the extensive efforts, no clear suspect emerged in the immediate aftermath. Several individuals were questioned, and some even detained, but none of these lines of inquiry produced the concrete evidence needed for an arrest. The evidence collected from the scene, while pointing to violence, did not immediately provide a direct link to an identifiable individual. The lack of a clear motive, combined with the absence of a definitive suspect, caused the investigation to falter. The case, once a flurry of activity, slowly began to grow cold. Years passed, transforming the active investigation into a perplexing cold case. The initial shock and widespread public interest gradually faded, replaced by a quiet sense of unresolved injustice. For Evelyn Foster's family, however, the passing of time did not diminish their pain or their yearning for answers. The case file, though closed in the active sense, remained a constant presence in the archives of Northumberland's police force. Periodically, new detectives would review the case, hoping that a fresh pair of eyes or a new perspective might reveal something missed by their predecessors. The limitations of 1931's forensic science meant that many avenues of inquiry that are standard today were simply unavailable. DNA profiling was still decades in the future, and fingerprint analysis, while used, was not as sophisticated as it would become. This meant that the case relied heavily on traditional investigative methods, interviews, witness statements, and the analysis of physical objects without the benefit of advanced scientific techniques. Each review of the case was a painstaking process, reading through handwritten notes, meticulously examining photographs, and trying to reconstruct the events of that fateful night based on the available, often limited, information. The quiet, persistent nature of the case meant that occasional, seemingly minor, details or shifts in public memory would sometimes prompt a re-examination. One such re-examination occurred many years later, prompted by renewed interest in historical cold cases. This time, however, the focus shifted not just to the old evidence, but to the broader context of the period and to new information that had come to light in other unrelated cases. It was understood that the answers, if they were to be found, might lie in the subtle currents of history, in an overlooked pattern, or a quiet testimony given in another context, a testament that might suddenly gain new meaning. The very obscurity of the location where Evelyn was found, and the nature of her injuries, suggested a calculated, private act rather than a random crime. This understanding slowly began to guide the quiet reassessment of the limited clues. A significant, albeit quiet, breakthrough in the case came not from new forensic evidence, but from the re-evaluation of existing knowledge and a deeper understanding of the individuals involved. Decades after Evelyn's passing, cold case detectives, in consultation with historical experts, began to look at the known suspects and individuals of interest with a renewed lens, informed by information that had emerged since 1931. While no single new piece of evidence dramatically solved the case, the quiet power of pattern recognition began to emerge. Investigators revisited the statements of an individual who had been questioned early in the investigation, but never charged, a man named George Leslie Saint. Saint had been an early suspect due to his proximity to the area and some inconsistencies in his initial statements, but there had been insufficient evidence to connect him definitively to Evelyn's passing. His behavior and known history, when re-examined through the quiet prism of decades of subsequent information, began to align in a disturbing way with the profile of the perpetrator. The re-evaluation focused on George Leslie Saint's known criminal history and his activities around the time of Evelyn's passing. It was revealed that Saint had a history of violent behavior and was known to frequent the roads in the area where Evelyn worked and where her taxi was found. While these were not new facts, the interpretation of these facts had changed over time, informed by collective experience in criminal investigations. What might have seemed like isolated incidents in 1931, when viewed together with later information, began to form a pattern. Quiet breakthrough was in recognizing that a deeper, more systematic review of the historical records and police intelligence related to Saint, beyond just the Evelyn Foster case, revealed a more complete picture of an individual capable of such a violent act. This was a silent accumulation of knowledge, slowly building until the pieces clicked into place, not with a sudden flash, but with a quiet, undeniable coherence. While George Leslie Saint was never formally charged and convicted for Evelyn Foster's passing due to his own passing in the year 1940, the cold case review in the early 2000s concluded that he was the most likely perpetrator. This conclusion was based on the exhaustive re-evaluation of the historical evidence, his known movements, his prior criminal behavior, and the subtle, previously unnoticed inconsistencies in his original alibis. It was a silent form of justice, a truth quietly affirmed by the passage of time and the patient, persistent work of historical investigation. The official conclusion brought a quiet sense of closure, even in the absence of a trial. For Evelyn Foster's family, it meant that after decades of uncertainty, a name could finally be associated with the profound loss they endured. The enduring mystery of Evelyn Foster stands as a poignant example of how some truths, though never fully adjudicated in a courtroom, can nonetheless be quietly revealed through the diligent, long-term work of those committed to uncovering the past. It speaks to the slow, methodical process of historical justice, where patterns emerge from the quiet corners of archives, and where the most elusive answers can sometimes be found in the subtle reinterpretation of existing facts. Evelyn's story, though tragic, now quietly underlines the profound depth of cold case investigation. Our third journey takes us to the bustling city of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where a case involving a former police officer and a tragic loss of life would unfold into one of the most enduring and controversial mysteries of its time. This is the complex story of Lori Bembenek, a case fraught with twists and turns, where a quiet persistence for truth and overlooked details became central to its many decades-long narrative. It was the month of May, in the year 1980. Christine Schultz, the former wife of a Milwaukee police detective, Fred Schultz, passed away in her home. She'd been bound, gagged, and shot. The violent nature of her passing sent shockwaves through the community, and particularly through the Milwaukee Police Department. The initial investigation focused intensely on Fred Schultz, given the nature of the relationship and the circumstances. However, the investigation quickly shifted, and within a short period, attention turned to Lori Bembenek. Lori was a former Milwaukee police officer herself, a strikingly beautiful young woman who had recently left the force and was, at the time of the incident, engaged to Fred Schultz. Her connection to the victim through Fred made her an immediate person of interest. The prosecution's case against Lori Bembenek was built on circumstantial evidence. A key piece of evidence was a green X-Acto knife found at the scene, which was described as belonging to Fred Schultz. Another crucial element was the testimony of Christine Schultz's 10-year-old son, Sean, who stated he had seen a person with a ponytail and green pants leaving the scene. Lori was known to wear green pants, and her hair could be styled into a ponytail. Further, a partial wig, reportedly belonging to Lori, was found in a toilet at her home, which the prosecution suggested she might have used as a disguise. The narrative presented was that Lori had entered Christine's home through an open window, committed the act, and then fled. Despite Lori's vehement denials and an initial lack of direct, irrefutable evidence, the accumulation of these circumstantial points led to her arrest and subsequent trial. The trial of Lori Bembenek became a media sensation, drawing national attention. The prosecution argued that Lori was motivated by jealousy and a desire to eliminate Fred Schultz's financial obligations to his former wife. They painted a picture of a calculated and cold individual. The defense, however, maintained Lori's innocence, arguing that she was being framed, possibly by members of the police department who harbored resentment towards her. Lori had, prior to the incident, filed a complaint against the Milwaukee Police Department, alleging discrimination and misconduct. This made the case particularly contentious, fueling theories of a deeper conspiracy. Despite the defense's arguments and Lori's consistent declarations of innocence, the jury returned a guilty verdict. In the year 1982, Lori Bembenek was found guilty of the charges related to Christine Schultz's passing and sentenced to life in prison. She was sent to the Taycheedah Correctional Institution. However, Lori Bembenek's story was far from over. From behind bars, she relentlessly fought to clear her name. Her case became a cause célèbre, attracting a devoted following of supporters who believed she had been wrongly convicted. They launched campaigns, raised funds, and tirelessly worked to uncover new evidence that might exonerate her. This period was marked by countless appeals, legal challenges, and a persistent drumbeat of doubt about the original verdict. New information began to quietly surface, much of it related to the reliability of key evidence and witness testimony presented at the trial. Questions arose about the green X-Acto knife, its true ownership, and whether it had been properly handled as evidence. The testimony of Sean Schultz also came under renewed scrutiny, with later questions emerging about potential influences on his recollection. The crucial turning point, a silent breakthrough that would shatter the facade of a closed case, came through the meticulous re-examination of forensic evidence, particularly the partial wig found in Lori's home. In the year 1990, years after her conviction, the defense managed to secure the right to have DNA testing performed on the wig. This was a significant development, as DNA analysis was not available at the time of the original trial. The scientific methods of 1980 simply could not extract or analyze genetic material from such a small sample with the precision required to be conclusive. The hope was that this new technology would either confirm the prosecution's theory or, more hopefully for Lori's supporters, provide definitive proof of her innocence. The process was painstaking, requiring expert forensic scientists to carefully extract any viable DNA from the few strands of hair attached to the wig. The anticipation was palpable, as the results had the power to dramatically alter the course of justice. When the results of the DNA testing came back, they delivered a quiet yet profound shockwave. The DNA found on the partial wig did not match Lori Bembenek. Furthermore, the DNA profile found on the wig belonged to a woman, but it was not Christine Schultz's DNA either. This was a monumental development. The very piece of evidence that had been so central to the prosecution's argument, suggesting Lori had used it as part of a disguise, now undermined their entire case. If the wig was not Lori's, and not the victim's, its presence and the prosecution's interpretation of it came to serious question. This quiet, scientific revelation cast significant doubt on the integrity of the original evidence and, by extension, on the validity of the conviction. It implied that the wig, a key link, was a red herring or perhaps something even more sinister. The revelation of the DNA evidence ignited a fresh wave of public and legal scrutiny. Lori Bembenek, after years of unwavering appeals, finally saw a path towards freedom. The DNA results, combined with other inconsistencies and claims of police misconduct that had surfaced over the years, led to her release from prison in the year 1992. She was granted a new trial, a rare and hard-won victory in her long fight for justice. Her release sparked celebrations among her supporters, but it also reignited the debate about her guilt or innocence. The state, facing the profound implications of the new evidence, was forced to reevaluate their entire position. The quiet scientific data had spoken louder than years of testimony and public opinion. However, the path to full exoneration remained fraught with complexities. The legal system, slow and deliberate, moved towards a new trial. In the interim, Lori Bembenek found herself once again in the public eye, her story broadcast across the nation. The pressure of the ongoing legal battle, coupled with the intense media scrutiny, took its toll. Rather than endure another lengthy and potentially traumatic trial, Lori entered a plea agreement. In the year 1992, she pleaded no contest to a lesser charge of second-degree murder. This plea allowed her to maintain her innocence while avoiding the risk of a new conviction for a more severe offense. While it wasn't a full exoneration, it allowed her to walk free and live out her life away from the confines of prison. She eventually moved to Canada, seeking a quieter existence away from the relentless spotlight that had followed her for so long. The case of Lori Bembenek stands as a powerful testament to the quiet, persistent nature of truth and the profound impact of scientific advancement on the pursuit of justice. It illustrates how even in the face of widespread public reception and a seemingly conclusive verdict, the silent, undeniable voice of forensic evidence can emerge years later to challenge assumptions and redefine narratives. It's a reminder that investigations are not always complete when the verdict is read, and that sometimes the quiet work of re-examination and new technologies can lead to the most significant breakthroughs, bringing a form of closure, even if the full, unequivocal truth remains subtly debated in the annals of history. The Bembenek case continues to be discussed, a quiet echo of a complex and captivating mystery. Our fourth narrative takes us to the tranquil, yet sometimes unsettling, landscapes of Washington state, to a case that would haunt a family and a community for decades. This is the story of Kimberly and Misty Copsey, two young sisters who vanished without a trace, leaving behind a profound emptiness. For many years, their disappearance was a chilling enigma until an unseen thread, woven through unrelated events and patient investigation, began to slowly unravel the truth. It was the month of July in the year 1985. Kimberly and Misty Copsey, aged 10 and 8 respectively, were enjoying a summer evening at a carnival in Forest Park, located in Everett, Washington. They were bright, energetic children, and their presence brought joy to their family. They were attending the carnival with their mother and her friend, a seemingly innocent outing on a warm summer night. The carnival was a place of laughter and fleeting distractions, a vibrant backdrop that would soon turn into a scene of profound sorrow. Sometime during the evening, the girls became separated from their mother. The initial separation was likely thought to be a momentary lapse, easily corrected in the crowded carnival setting. However, as the minutes turned into agonizing hours, a chilling realization set in. Kimberly and Misty were truly gone. The disappearance of the Copsey sisters immediately triggered a massive search effort. Local law enforcement, aided by countless volunteers, combed Forest Park and the surrounding areas. The police launched a full-scale investigation, interviewing everyone who had seen the girls, checking local businesses, and distributing missing person flyers throughout the region and beyond. The media quickly picked up on the story, broadcasting their images and pleas for information across the state and the nation. The family was desperate for any news, clinging to every possible lead. The initial days were a whirlwind of activity, hope battling against a growing sense of dread. Park, once a symbol of summer fun, became a somber search ground, its trees and trails holding silent witness to an unfolding tragedy. Despite the exhaustive efforts, no trace of Kimberly or Misty was found. No ransom demands were made, no credible sightings reported, and no concrete evidence emerged to explain their vanishing. As the weeks turned into months, and then into years, the case of Kimberly and Misty Copsey grew cold. The active search wound down, but the questions remained, a gaping wound in the hearts of their family. The sisters became a poignant symbol of unresolved mysteries, their faces on faded posters a constant reminder of the answers that lay hidden. Their names were entered into national databases for missing persons, and their disappearance was regularly reviewed by cold case units. However, without new leads or a significant breakthrough in forensic science, the case seemed to be trapped in a permanent state of limbo. The passage of time often dims memories and disperses potential witnesses, making cold cases notoriously difficult to solve. The Copsey family endured decades of agonizing uncertainty, always hoping for a return, but also bracing for the worst. The quiet landscape of Washington state held its secrets tightly. The silent breakthrough in the Copsey case arrived decades later, not through a dramatic new piece of evidence directly from the original crime scene, but through an unseen thread connecting seemingly unrelated events and a quiet, persistent re-examination of old information. The key to unlocking the Copsey mystery lay hidden within the details of another, equally heartbreaking cold case, the disappearance and passing of a young woman named Tracy Bratton in the year 1988, also in Washington state. For years, these two cases, though both unsolved disappearances, were not formally linked in a way that produced a breakthrough. They were separate files, separate investigations. However, the patient work of cold case detectives often involves looking for patterns, for subtle commonalities across different unresolved cases, hoping to find that one shared element that might pull them together. Detectives from the Snohomish County Sheriff's Office Cold Case Unit, driven by an unwavering commitment to both Tracy Bratton and the Copsey sisters, began a meticulous review of both files. They painstakingly re-examined every interview, every piece of evidence, every theory associated with each case. It was during this painstaking process that a name began to surface with increasing frequency and concern across both investigations: David Neff. Neff had been known to law enforcement for various reasons, and his name had appeared in connection with individuals and locations relevant to both the Bratton case and, more peripherally, the Copsey disappearance. However, at no point had he been definitively linked to either in a conclusive manner in the earlier years. The cold case detectives realized that what might have appeared as isolated pieces of information in separate contexts, when viewed through a combined lens, started to form a disturbing pattern. The unseen thread truly began to tighten when authorities in Arizona, working on an entirely separate investigation, made an arrest in the year 2002. This arrest was for an unrelated offense. During the course of their investigation, law enforcement officers there developed information that David Neff, now residing in Arizona, might have knowledge related to the disappearance of the Copsey sisters. This was a critical moment, a lead emerging from an entirely different jurisdiction, prompted by a different set of circumstances, quietly connecting back to the cold case in Washington state. It highlighted the power of interagency cooperation and the quiet, often unheralded, ways that information can travel across distances and time to illuminate old mysteries. This new information, though still indirect, was enough to reignite focused attention on Neff in relation to the Copsey case. With this renewed focus, Snohomish County detectives traveled to Arizona to interview David Neff. Confronted with the growing body of circumstantial evidence and the relentless persistence of the investigators, Neff eventually made a profound and chilling confession. He admitted his involvement in the disappearances and tragic passings of Kimberly and Misty Copsey. His confession provided the long-awaited answers that had eluded law enforcement and tormented the Copsey family for decades. He detailed how he encountered the girls at the carnival in 1985, lured them away, and committed the unspeakable acts that led to their deaths. The confession also led investigators to the recovery of some of the girls' remains in a remote, wooded area of Washington state, finally providing a measure of closure for the family after 20 years of agonizing uncertainty. David Neff's confession, obtained in the year 2002, marked the quiet yet undeniable end to one of Washington's most perplexing cold cases. While the confession provided the long-sought answers, the legal process still needed to unfold. Neff eventually pleaded guilty to the charges related to the deaths of Kimberly and Misty Copsey, as well as to the death of Tracy Bratton, confirming the grim connection that cold case detectives had subtly pursued. He received a life sentence, ensuring he would never again pose a threat. The resolution of the Copsey case was a profound moment for their family, who, despite the immense pain, could finally begin the long process of mourning and remembrance with the truth revealed. The case of Kimberly and Misty Copsey serves as a powerful and poignant example of how a silent breakthrough can emerge not from a single dramatic discovery, but from the quiet, persistent work of connecting disparate pieces of information across different cases and jurisdiction. It underscores the importance of cold case units and their unwavering dedication to revisiting old files, seeking those unseen threads that, when finally pulled, can unravel decades of mystery. It is a testament to the belief that some truths, no matter how deeply buried or how long they wait, will eventually find their way to the light, bringing a measure of peace to those who have waited so patiently in the shadow of the unknown. Our fifth story takes us to the sunny and seemingly idyllic landscape of Orange County, California, where a terrifying pattern of harassment escalated into a chilling disappearance and an enduring mystery. This is the tragic story of Dorothy Jane Scott, a case marked by an unseen stalker and a profound absence, where a quiet, overlooked clue held the potential for answers for years, waiting for its moment to speak. It was the month of May in the year 1980. Dorothy Jane Scott, a vibrant and caring single mother of two, worked as a secretary at an eyeglasses factory in Anaheim, California. She was a dedicated parent, a thoughtful friend, and a reliable employee, a quiet, consistent presence in her community. In the months leading up to her disappearance, Dorothy had been experiencing an increasingly disturbing and persistent harassment campaign. She was receiving anonymous phone calls, often late at night, from an individual who claimed to be watching her. The caller would make unsettling remarks, detailing her daily activities, her clothing, and even the private moments of her life. He often threatened to physically harm her. This chilling harassment cast a long, unsettling shadow over Dorothy's otherwise ordinary life, causing her significant distress and fear. Dorothy had taken precautions against her unseen tormentor. She had acquired a dog for protection, started taking a karate class, and even considered purchasing a handgun. She had also shared details of the calls with friends and family, hoping that others being aware might deter the caller, or perhaps help in identifying him. Despite her efforts, the calls continued, escalating in their intensity and their threatening nature. The police had been notified, but without a clear suspect or concrete evidence of a physical crime, their ability to intervene effectively was limited. The nature of the threats was insidious, creating a constant state of anxiety for Dorothy and those close to her. The unseen hand of her stalker was steadily tightening its grip, pushing her into a state of constant vigilance and fear, leading up to the fateful night that would change everything. On the night of May 28, 1980, Dorothy Jane Scott went to Western Medical Center in Santa Ana to pick up a coworker, Vera Luton, who had been bitten by a spider. After picking up Vera, Dorothy drove her home, dropping her off sometime after 11 o'clock that evening. This was the last confirmed sighting of Dorothy. She was expected to return home to her son, but she never arrived. When morning broke and Dorothy was still absent, her family immediately knew something was terribly wrong. Her car, a white 1972 white Toyota, was found burning in an alley less than 10 miles from the hospital she had visited the previous night. The discovery of the burning car intensified the alarm, suggesting that her disappearance was no accident, but instead directly linked to her persistent harasser. The discovery of Dorothy's burning car immediately initiated a full-scale investigation. The scene was carefully processed, but the fire had consumed much of the potential evidence from the vehicle itself. Authorities launched an extensive search for Dorothy, canvassing areas between her last known location and where her car was found. They interviewed her friends, family, and coworkers, focusing intensely on the anonymous phone calls she had received. Her family provided details about the chilling threats and the unsettling nature of the caller's knowledge of her life. Law enforcement theorized that the anonymous caller was now responsible for her disappearance. However, without a body, a clear crime scene beyond the burning car, or a definitive suspect, the investigation struggled to gain traction. The mysterious caller, emboldened perhaps by his perceived success, continued his terrifying campaign. In the days and weeks following Dorothy's disappearance, the anonymous phone calls continued, but now they were directed at Dorothy's grieving family. The caller would mock them, taunt them with details of Dorothy's last moments, and even play music and taunting messages. These calls were profoundly disturbing, adding immeasurable pain to the family's anguish. Caller even contacted Dorothy's employer, revealing details about her personal effects that only he could have known, further confirming that he was indeed the individual responsible for her vanishing. These calls, while horrifying, also became a crucial, albeit disturbing, source of potential information. The family desperately hoped that the police could trace these calls to finally identify the unseen voice that was tormenting them and held the answers to Dorothy's fate. The initial investigation into the phone calls proved difficult. In 1980, call tracing technology was not as sophisticated as it is today. While efforts were made to trace the calls, the caller was cunning, often using payphones and keeping his conversations brief, making it challenging to pinpoint his exact location. The police had a voice on tape, as some of the calls to the family were recorded, but without a suspect to compare it to, or a way to definitively trace the calls. This evidence alone was insufficient for an arrest. The case grew cold, a haunting, unresolved mystery for her family, compounded by the chilling continuation of the anonymous calls. These calls served as a constant reminder that Dorothy's tormentor was still at large and still watching. The quiet, crucial, and ultimately overlooked clue in Dorothy Jane Scott's case, for many years, resided within one of those very anonymous phone calls. In the summer of 1981, over a year after Dorothy's disappearance, a local newspaper, the Orange County Register, published a story about her case. Shortly after the article appeared, a chilling phone call came into the newspaper's office. The caller was the anonymous individual who'd been harassing Dorothy and her family. He spoke to a reporter, confirming his responsibility for Dorothy's disappearance and taunting the police. During this call, the unseen individual made a subtle, yet ultimately critical, mistake. He spoke about an item of Dorothy's jewelry. The specific detail, the type of jewelry, and how it was situated on Dorothy was something that had never been released to the public or the media. It was a piece of information known only to the individual who was with Dorothy at the time of her passing. This seemingly minor detail, overlooked initially in the vastness of the ongoing calls and investigation, became the silent breakthrough. Years later, as cold case detectives revisited Dorothy's file, this specific detail from the recorded phone call to the newspaper stood out. It was a detail so particular and so unpublicized that it could only have been known by the perpetrator. It was the unnoticed clue that the title of our video refers to, a quiet piece of information, patiently waiting for the right moment and the right set of eyes to recognize its profound significance. The fact that the caller knew this hidden detail confirmed, beyond any reasonable doubt, that he was Dorothy's tormentor and the individual responsible for her vanishing. It offered a crucial direct link that had been missed in the initial chaos and urgency of the investigation. While the specific detail from the phone call identified the caller as the perpetrator, it still did not provide a name. The voice on the tape was chilling, but a voice alone, without a suspect to match it to, remained an agonizing enigma. The case continued to be investigated periodically, with forensic advancements in voice analysis being explored, but these often proved inconclusive without a known voice to compare against. Dorothy Jane Scott's remains were finally discovered in the month of August, in the year 1984, in a remote, undeveloped area of Santa Ana Canyon, not far from where her car was found burning. The discovery provided some closure regarding her fate, but the identity of her tormentor remained elusive. The cause of her passing was determined, but due to the decomposition and condition of the remains, specific evidence linked directly to a perpetrator was minimal. Despite the discovery of her remains, the case of Dorothy Jane Scott remains, to this day, officially unsolved. However, the silent breakthrough of the overlooked clue from the phone call to the newspaper became the strongest, though unconfirmed, lead. Investigators have subsequently developed a primary person of interest, Jack Crawford. Crawford was a known individual in the area with a history of violence against women, and he was found to have been living and working in the vicinity of Dorothy's home and workplace around the time of her disappearance. While no formal charges have ever been filed against Crawford in connection with Dorothy's passing due to insufficient direct evidence for prosecution, the knowledge he possessed from the anonymous phone call to the Orange County Register remains a chilling and compelling piece of circumstantial evidence pointing squarely at him. Crawford passed away in the year 1988, taking any definitive answers with him. The case of Dorothy Jane Scott is a profound and unsettling example of how an unseen, persistent threat can escalate into tragedy, and how even the most crucial piece of evidence can remain quietly overlooked for years. It highlights the agonizing reality of some cold cases, where a strong person of interest is identified and key insights are gained, but the full, legally prosecutable truth remains just out of reach. Her story stands as a testament to the quiet, chilling precision of an unknown tormentor, and the enduring hope that even in cases without formal closure, the persistent re-examination of forgotten details can shed a quiet, revealing light on what truly happened. It reminds us that truth, like a faint echo, can sometimes be heard only after years of patient listening. Our sixth journey takes us to the tranquil, snow-dusted landscape of rural Colorado, where a winter evening turned into a chilling mystery, and a quiet, unseen witness would eventually, many years later, provide the crucial insight. This is the tragic story of Evelyn Wagler, a seemingly random act of violence that baffled investigators for decades, until a silent breakthrough, lying dormant within the evidence itself, finally revealed the truth. It was the month of January in the year 1987. Evelyn Wagler, a 50-year-old mother and grandmother, was known for her kindness and her quiet devotion to her family. She lived a simple, peaceful life in the small, close-knit community of Montezuma County, Colorado. On the evening of January 21st, Evelyn was returning home from a church service in the nearby town of Cortez. The night was cold, and the rural roads were dark, often bordered by vast open fields and distant snow-capped peaks. She was driving her vehicle, a blue Ford pickup truck, a familiar sight on these quiet country roads. Evelyn was a creature of routine, and her predictable movements made her a familiar presence in the rhythm of the community. Her journey home was something she had undertaken countless times, a quiet end to a day of reflection and community. As Evelyn drove along Montezuma County Road 25, a remote and sparsely traveled stretch, her peaceful journey was violently interrupted. Her truck suddenly veered off the road and came to a stop. What transpired next was a terrifying struggle. Evelyn Wagler passed away at the scene from multiple injuries. The circumstances pointed to a violent and deliberate act. Her truck was found damaged, and there were signs of a struggle near the vehicle, indicating a desperate fight for her life. The remote location, devoid of immediate witnesses or residential areas, meant that the violent events of that winter night unfolded in chilling isolation, leaving little behind but a profound silence and a desperate plea for answers. The discovery of Evelyn Wagler's truck and her individual the following morning sent shockwaves through the quiet Montezuma County community. Local law enforcement, quickly on the scene, initiated a meticulous investigation. Crime scene was challenging, with the cold winter weather and the isolated rural setting complicating the collection of evidence. Investigators processed the truck and the surrounding area with painstaking care, searching for any forensic clues that might point to the perpetrator. They collected samples, photographed the scene extensively, and attempted to reconstruct the events of the previous night. The initial investigation focused on identifying any potential suspects who might have had a motive or been in the area. Interviews were conducted with family, friends, and anyone who might have seen Evelyn on the night of her passing. However, despite the diligent efforts, no clear suspects emerged, and no immediate, tangible leads materialized from the scene itself. Case quickly became a perplexing cold case, a chilling enigma that settled heavily over the community for decades. Years passed, and the mystery of Evelyn Wagler's passing deepened. The case file, though reviewed periodically, remained stubbornly resistant to resolution. The initial shock and the flurry of investigative activity faded into the quiet persistence of a long unsolved crime. For Evelyn's family, the absence of answers was a constant source of grief and frustration. Cold case detectives in Montezuma County continued to hold on to the hope that new information or advancements in forensic science might one day provide the breakthrough needed. The limitations of forensic science in the 1980s, particularly concerning DNA analysis, meant that many pieces of evidence collected at the scene could not yield the conclusive results that modern techniques would later provide. Fingerprint analysis was available, but without a suspect to compare against, or a database as comprehensive as those available today, its utility was limited. The silence surrounding Evelyn's final moments remained unbroken, a heavy burden on the quiet community. The silent breakthrough in the Evelyn Wagler case arrived through the quiet evolution of forensic science and the persistent, meticulous work of cold case detectives. Decades after her passing, in the year 2006, the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, in conjunction with the Montezuma County Sheriff's Office, decided to re-examine the evidence collected from the original 1987 crime scene. The focus was specifically on items that might contain biological material, which, in 1987, could not be thoroughly analyzed. The hope was that modern DNA technology, significantly advanced since the original investigation, would finally be able to extract a usable profile from what was once considered inconclusive or too minimal to test. This decision was a quiet act of faith in scientific progress, a belief that the past could still yield its secrets if asked with the right tools. Forensic scientists meticulously re-examined evidence collected from the scene, including a blood sample found on Evelyn Wagler's clothing. This was a critical piece of evidence that had been preserved, awaiting the day technology could truly speak its silent truth. In 1987, the blood type could be determined, but a unique genetic profile could not be generated. Now, in the 2000s, the situation was different. Through advanced DNA extraction and profiling techniques, forensic experts were able to generate a full DNA profile from this tiny but profoundly significant blood sample. This profile was then entered into the CODIS system, the Combined DNA Index System, a national database that connects DNA profiles from crime scenes to known offenders. This was the moment of the silent breakthrough, the culmination of years of quiet scientific progress, waiting for its moment to reveal a hidden identity. The entry into CODIS produced an immediate and stunning match. The DNA profile from Evelyn Wagler's clothing was identified as belonging to an individual named Robert D. Brown. This was a name that had never surfaced as a suspect in the original 1987 investigation. Brown was an individual with a criminal history, and his DNA profile was in CODIS due to previous convictions for other unrelated offenses. This match was the definitive, undeniable link that cold case detectives had been patiently waiting for. It provided the unseen witness, the silent testimony from the crime scene itself, pointing directly to the individual responsible for Evelyn Wagler's passing. The quiet desert night of 1987 had, after all, held a secret slowly revealed by the advancing precision of science. With the DNA match providing the critical identification, investigators meticulously began to build a case against Robert D. Brown. They delved into his history, his whereabouts in 1987, and any potential connections he might have had to Evelyn Wagler or the Montezuma County area. They discovered that Brown had indeed been living in the Montezuma County area around the time of Evelyn's passing. While there was no known direct relationship between Brown and Evelyn, the DNA evidence firmly placed him at the scene of the struggle and strongly indicated his direct involvement in her passing. The focus shifted from searching for a suspect to systematically gathering all evidence to support the prosecution against Brown, corroborating the DNA with any other available details from the long-dormant file. The pieces of the puzzle, once scattered and seemingly unrelated, now began to quietly assemble into a coherent picture. The evidence now anchored by the irrefutable DNA match, became overwhelming. In the year 2007, 20 years after Evelyn Wagler's passing, Robert D. Brown was arrested and charged in connection with her death. The arrest brought a profound sense of relief and a quiet form of justice to Evelyn's family, who had endured decades of unanswered questions. The legal proceedings that followed meticulously laid out the scientific evidence, detailing how a tiny blood sample, preserved for years, had finally spoken with undeniable clarity. The prosecution presented the cold, hard facts of the DNA match, complemented by the historical details of the case. In the year 2008, Robert D. Brown was found guilty of the charges related to Evelyn Wagler's passing and received a life sentence. This conviction marked the quiet, yet powerful, resolution of a case that had haunted Montezuma County for 2 decades. It was a testament to the perseverance of cold case detectives and the transformative power of modern forensic science. The case of Evelyn Wagler serves as a poignant reminder that no case is ever truly forgotten, and that the silent, unseen evidence patiently waiting for its moment can eventually lead to justice. It illustrates how the meticulous preservation of even the smallest biological traces, combined with the relentless march of scientific innovation, can unveil truths that once seemed permanently hidden, bringing a quiet peace to families who have endured years of sorrow. Our 7th story leads us to the rugged, breathtaking landscapes of Utah, where a young life was tragically cut short, leaving behind a profound and agonizing mystery in the desolate wilderness. This is a harrowing story of Crystal Beslanowicz, a case that remained cold for decades until a silent breakthrough, lying in plain sight on a seemingly unremarkable piece of evidence, finally provided the answers. It was the month of August in the year 1991. Crystal Beslanowicz, a 19-year-old woman, had recently arrived in the scenic mountain town of Park City, Utah. She was seeking new opportunities, a fresh start in the summer resort town. Crystal was known to be a kind individual, navigating the challenges of finding her footing in a new place. On the night of August 14th, Crystal was last seen in the area of a truck stop on the outskirts of Park City. She was a vulnerable young woman, and her presence in that area late at night quickly raised concerns when she failed to appear the next day. Quiet, usually peaceful mountains surrounding Park City would soon bear witness to a profound tragedy, a stark contrast to their natural beauty. On the morning of August 16th, 1991, a group of river rafters made a horrific discovery near the banks of the Weber River, a short distance from the town of Colalville, Utah, approximately 20 miles from Park City. They found Crystal Beslanowicz's individual. She had passed away from blunt force trauma. The brutality of the act sent shockwaves through the quiet mountain communities. The remote, rocky area along the river, usually a place of recreation and natural beauty, was now a somber crime scene. Investigators arrived quickly, meticulously processing the scene for any clues that could lead them to the perpetrator. The terrain was rugged, making the search for evidence challenging, but the focus was intense on finding anything that could connect the act to an individual. The immediate investigation launched a major effort by local and state law enforcement. Detectives interviewed anyone who might have seen Crystal in the days leading up to her passing, particularly focusing on her last known movements around the truck stop. They sought to identify anyone she might have been with or any vehicles she might have entered. Forensic investigators carefully collected evidence from the scene. Among the items collected were rocks found near Crystal's individual, which appeared to have been used in the violent act. These rocks were meticulously packaged and sent for forensic analysis. However, in 1991, the forensic capabilities especially regarding DNA analysis, were limited compared to later advancements. While blood type analysis was possible, obtaining a full identifiable DNA profile from rough, porous surfaces like rocks was exceedingly difficult, often yielding inconclusive results. Despite diligent efforts and the collection of various samples, no immediate DNA match or other direct link to a suspect was found. The case eventually grew cold, a lingering sorrow in the heart of Utah's mountains. Years, then decades, passed, and the tragic passing of Crystal Beslanowicz remained an unsolved mystery. The case file, though never truly forgotten, slowly settled into the archives of the Summit County Sheriff's Office. For Crystal's family, the passage of time brought no solace, only the quiet agony of unanswered questions. Cold case detectives, however, maintained a quiet, unwavering commitment to finding justice for Crystal. They understood that technological advancements, though slow to arrive, might one day provide the breakthrough. The original evidence, particularly the rocks, was meticulously preserved, a testament to the foresight of the initial investigators who understood the potential future value of such materials. The raw, seemingly inert surfaces of these stones held a silent secret, waiting for the right scientific tools to coax it forth. The silent breakthrough in Crystal Beslanowicz's case arrived a remarkable 22 years after her passing, through the quiet yet persistent evolution of forensic science. In the year 2013, cold case detectives from the Summit County Sheriff's Office, collaborating with the Utah State Crime Lab, decided to re-examine the original evidence. Their focus was specifically on those very rocks which had been collected from the scene in 1991. The hope was that advancements in DNA technology, particularly techniques for collecting and amplifying trace DNA from challenging surfaces, would finally be able to extract a usable profile. The challenge was immense, recovering DNA from a rough, weathered rock surface that had been exposed to the elements for over 2 decades. This required cutting-edge methodology and painstaking precision. Forensic scientists at the Utah State Crime Lab undertook the monumental task of attempting to extract DNA from the rocks. They employed a technique known as forensic vacuum metallization, a method originally developed for fingerprint detection on porous surfaces, but adapted for trace DNA. This involved carefully coating the rocks with a thin layer of metal in a vacuum chamber, which can reveal latent biological material. Then, through highly sensitive extraction techniques, they managed to recover a minute amount of epithelial cells, or skin cells, from the surface of one of the rocks. From these few cells, they were able to generate a full DNA profile. This was the quiet scientific triumph, a testament to the relentless innovation in the field of forensics, turning a seemingly insurmountable challenge into a profound revelation. The DNA profile generated from the rock was then entered into CODIS, the Combined DNA Index System. This was the moment of quiet anticipation as the database, a vast collection of genetic blueprints, began its silent search for a match. And in a stunning and immediate revelation, CODIS produced a match. The DNA profile from the rock was identified as belonging to an individual named Joseph Michael Simpson. This was a name that had never been on the radar of investigators in 1991. Simpson had a criminal history, and his DNA profile was in the CODIS system due to previous convictions for other unrelated offenses. This match was the definitive, undeniable link, the lingering trace that had waited patiently for over 2 decades to be heard, finally providing the silent witness to Crystal's last moment. With the DNA match providing the critical identification, investigators meticulously began to build a case against Joseph Michael Simpson. They delved into his past, his whereabouts in 1991, and any potential connections he might have had to Park City or Colville. they discovered that Simpson had, in fact, been living in Utah at the time of Crystal's passing, residing in the Salt Lake City area. While there was no known direct relationship between Simpson and Crystal, the DNA evidence firmly placed him at the scene of the violence, strongly indicating his direct involvement in her passing. The focus shifted from searching for a suspect to systematically gathering all evidence to support the prosecution against Simpson, corroborating the DNA with any other available details from the long-dormant file. The silent scientific evidence, extracted from a rock, spoke with an undeniable clarity. The evidence, now anchored by the irrefutable DNA match, became overwhelming. In the year 2013, 22 years after Crystal Beslanowicz's passing, Joseph Michael Simpson was arrested and charged in connection with her death. The arrest brought a profound sense of relief and a quiet form of justice to Crystal's family, who had endured decades of unanswered questions. The legal proceedings that followed meticulously laid out the scientific evidence, detailing how a minute trace of DNA preserved on a rock for years had finally spoken with undeniable clarity. Prosecution presented the cold, hard facts of the DNA match, complemented by the historical details of the case. In the year 2014, Joseph Michael Simpson pleaded guilty to the charges related to Crystal Beslanowicz's passing. He received a life sentence, ensuring he would never again pose a threat to another individual. This conviction marked the quiet, yet powerful, resolution of a case that had haunted Utah's mountains for over 2 decades. It was a testament to the perseverance of cold case detectives and the transformative power of modern forensic science. The case of Crystal Beslanowicz serves as a poignant reminder that no case is ever truly forgotten, and that the silent, unseen evidence, patiently waiting for its moment, can eventually lead to justice. It illustrates how the meticulous preservation of even the smallest biological traces, combined with the relentless march of scientific innovation, can unveil truths that once seemed permanently hidden, bringing a quiet peace to families who have endured years of sorrow. Our 8th story delves into one of the most infamous and terrifying cold cases in American history, a sprawling narrative of violence that terrorized California for decades. This is the complex and chilling story of the individual known for years as the original Night Stalker and the Golden State Killer, a case where the silent breakthrough came not from a single new piece of evidence, but from the quiet, persistent recognition of a forgotten pattern amplified by groundbreaking genealogical science. It was the month of June in the year 1975. A series of terrifying home intrusions and assaults began plaguing the quiet suburban communities of Sacramento, California. These initial acts were attributed to a perpetrator who became known as the East Area Rapist. The individual was a phantom, striking under the cover of darkness, leaving a trail of fear and profound trauma. The attacks were meticulously planned, often involving the perpetrator cutting phone lines, securing victims, and methodically searching homes. The pattern of his activities was distinct, characterized by a chilling precision and a relentless, escalating brutality. These initial assaults were confined to the Sacramento area, but the perpetrator soon expanded his reign of terror. Over the next decade, from the mid-1970s through the mid-1980s, the crimes continued to spread geographically and escalate in severity. The perpetrator moved south, extending his reach to Contra Costa, Stockton, Modesto, and eventually into Southern California, including Orange County and Ventura County. His modus operandi evolved. He transitioned from primarily sexual assaults to including the taking of lives. This chilling evolution led to him being re-identified by the media and investigators as the original Night Stalker, and, later, when the full scope of his crimes across various jurisdictions was understood as the Golden State Killer. The sheer number of his victims, the calculated nature of his acts, and his ability to evade capture for so long created an unprecedented climate of fear across California. Despite thousands of hours of investigative work, countless leads pursued, and numerous task forces established, the individual remained elusive, a silent shadow moving through the night. The initial investigations were hampered by the fragmented nature of the crimes across multiple jurisdictions. Each police department, while aware of similar patterns, was primarily focused on the crimes within its own area. Forensic science, in the 1970s and 80s, while developing, was not yet capable of the sophisticated DNA analysis that would later prove crucial. Blood typing, hair and fiber analysis, and fingerprinting were the primary tools. While fingerprints were occasionally found, they often did not yield a match in existing databases. The perpetrator was meticulously careful, leaving little in the way of direct, identifiable evidence. The sheer volume of victims and locations, spread across vast distances and over a decade, created an investigative nightmare. The case, or rather, the series of interconnected cases, became one of the most complex and frustrating cold cases in American history, a collection of profoundly disturbing patterns without a discernible face. Decades passed, and the case of the Golden State Killer grew cold, but never forgotten. For the victims and their families, the absence of justice was a lingering wound. The sheer terror he inflicted continued to echo through the communities he had touched. Law enforcement, however, never truly closed the files. Cold case detectives in various departments across California held onto the hope that new technologies or a fresh perspective might one day break the case open. The crucial understanding that slowly emerged over time was the realization that all these seemingly disparate crimes, the East Area Rapist attacks, the original Night Stalker attacks, and Visalia ransacker incidents, an earlier series of burglaries and one killing in Visalia, though initially believed to be separate, were all connected to a single perpetrator. This was the recognition of the forgotten pattern, a quiet, crucial reevaluation of the vast amount of existing historical evidence. This deep dive into the historical records was a quiet, internal process, meticulously piecing together the true scope of the terror. The silent breakthrough, a profound turning point in this colossal cold case, came not from a new piece of crime scene evidence, but from a revolutionary application of an existing forensic tool, genetic genealogy. In the year 2017, investigators, particularly those from the Sacramento County District Attorney's Office Cold Case Unit, decided to revisit the preserved DNA evidence from several of the Golden State Killer crime scenes. This DNA had been collected and stored years prior, yielding a profile that confirmed a single perpetrator but had never generated a match in the CODIS law enforcement database. The new approach involved taking this crime scene DNA profile and uploading it to public genealogical databases, platforms like GEDmatch, used by individuals to trace their family ancestry. This was a quiet, innovative shift in investigative strategy, venturing into a new realm of data. The process of genetic genealogy involves taking an unknown DNA profile and comparing it to the vast genetic trees created by millions of individuals who have voluntarily submitted their DNA to public databases. The goal is not a direct match to the perpetrator, but to find distant relatives, second, third, or even fourth cousins who share enough DNA to indicate a common ancestor. Once these distant relatives were identified through the database, highly skilled genealogists and cold case detectives painstakingly began the arduous task of building extensive family trees. working backward from the distant relatives to common ancestors, and then forward through the generations. This was a meticulous, often frustrating, but utterly persistent process, quietly narrowing down potential suspects who would fit the profile of the perpetrator and his known locations during the crime spree. This was the quiet art of tracing genetic echoes across generations. After months of painstaking genealogical work, piecing together family lines from the subtle genetic breadcrumbs, investigators narrowed their focus to a specific individual who fit the age, geographic movements, and other characteristics known about the Golden State Killer. This individual was Joseph James DeAngelo. DeAngelo was a former police officer who had worked in Exeter and Auburn, California in the 1970s, precisely when the crimes began. He had been dismissed from the police force in 1979 for shoplifting. This was a profoundly ironic and chilling discovery. The individual who had terrorized so many had once worn a badge, quietly living in the very communities he preyed upon. This quiet revelation, pieced together from genetic data and historical records, brought the phantom to life. With DeAngelo identified as the prime suspect, investigators began covert surveillance to obtain a fresh DNA sample from him in order to confirm the genetic genealogy match with a direct comparison to the crime scene DNA. This was a critical step, ensuring the irrefutability of the evidence. They carefully collected discarded items from DeAngelo's trash. When the new DNA sample from the discarded items was analyzed and compared directly to the crime scene DNA, it was a perfect match. This was the definitive, undeniable link, the silent breakthrough that officially solved one of the most enduring and terrifying cold cases in history. The quiet, persistent work of both forensic science and genealogical research had finally unmasked the individual who had eluded capture for decades. In the month of April, in the year 2018, Joseph James DeAngelo, then 72 years old, was arrested at his home in Citrus Heights, California. The arrest, after 42 years of terror and mystery, sent shockwaves of relief and vindication across the state and the nation. For the victims who had endured his violence and the families who had lost loved ones, it was a moment of profound, quiet justice. The legal process that followed involved meticulous presentation of the vast array of evidence, including the DNA connections to over 50 assaults and 13 killings. DeAngelo initially pleaded not guilty, but later, in the year 2020, entered a plea of guilty to multiple charges in exchange for avoiding the death penalty, bringing a final, quiet end to the long legal saga. Joseph James DeAngelo was sentenced to multiple life terms in prison, finally held accountable for his decades of terror. The case of the Golden State Killer stands as an extraordinary testament to the quiet, relentless pursuit of justice and the transformative power of innovation in forensic science. It illustrates how the combination of persistent detective work, the patient recognition of forgotten patterns in vast datasets, and the revolutionary application of genetic genealogy can finally unmask a perpetrator who believed himself safe from discovery for a lifetime. His capture brought a quiet closure to countless victims and families, offering a powerful message that even the most elusive truths, over time, can be gently, yet firmly, brought into the light. It reminds us that no matter how long the shadow, the quiet light of truth will eventually find its way. Our ninth journey takes us to the quiet, suburban landscape of Speedway, Indiana, where a seemingly ordinary night at a fast food restaurant transformed into one of the most perplexing and enduring cold cases in American history. This is the chilling story of the Burger Chief murders, a case that baffled investigators for decades until a quiet revisit of old theories, combined with the tireless efforts of cold case detectives, began to shed a subtle light on the long-held darkness. It was the month of November, in the year 1978. Four young employees of a burger chef restaurant in Speedway, a town adjacent to Indianapolis, vanished after closing for the night. The missing individuals were 18-year-old Luann Burkhart, the assistant manager, 16-year-old Jane Fried, also an employee, 17-year-old Daniel Davis, a cook, and 16-year-old Mark Flemons, a part-time employee. Their disappearance was discovered the following morning when a coworker arrived for the opening shift and found the restaurant doors ajar, money missing from the safe, and no sign of the four teenagers. The scene immediately suggested foul play, hinting at a robbery that had gone terribly wrong, transforming a mundane establishment into a silent, unsettling scene of mystery. The initial investigation launched a massive search effort across Indiana and beyond. The families of the missing teenagers endured agonizing days of uncertainty, their hope dwindling with each passing hour. 2 days later, on November 20th, 1978, a grim discovery was made in a remote, wooded area near a small town called Columbus, approximately 40 miles south of Speedway. The remains of Luann Burkhart, Jamie Fright, Daniel Davis, and Mark Flemons were found. All four had passed away from violent acts. Their discovery shattered the last vestiges of hope, confirming the community's worst fears and turning a missing persons case into a quadruple homicide investigation that would challenge law enforcement for generations. The peaceful woods, usually a place of quiet reflection, now held a profound and terrible secret. The crime scene in the woods was meticulously processed, but the rural location and the 2-day delay in discovery meant that crucial forensic evidence was scarce. Investigators worked tirelessly, interviewing hundreds of individuals, including family, friends, burger chef employees, and anyone who might have been in the vicinity of the restaurant on that fateful night. Numerous theories emerged: a robbery gone wrong, a drug-related dispute, or even a personal vendetta against one of the employees. Despite a wide array of leads and a dedicated task force, no clear suspects were identified in the immediate aftermath. The evidence collected, while providing some details about the nature of the violence, did not provide a direct link to an identifiable individual. The lack of concrete forensic breakthroughs, combined with conflicting witness statements and the sheer scale of the investigation, caused the case to quickly grow cold. The mystery of the burger chef murder settled heavily over Indiana, an enduring wound in the fabric of the state. Years, then decades, passed, and the burger chef murders remained one of Indiana's most frustrating and heart-wrenching cold cases. The initial fervor of the investigation faded, but the commitment of law enforcement never truly wavered. The case file, voluminous and dense with reports, remained open, periodically reviewed by new generations of cold case detectives. For the families of Luann, Jane, Daniel, and Mark, the passage of time brought no closure, only a persistent ache for answers. The limitations of forensic science in the 1970s, particularly regarding DNA analysis, meant that many promising avenues of inquiry were not fully realized. Fingerprint analysis was employed, but without a suspect database as extensive as those available today, it yielded no breakthroughs. Quiet torment of the unsolved crime endured, a silent testimony to the unknown perpetrator. Quiet revisit, a subtle yet significant shift in approach, began many years later, around the early 2000s. Cold case detectives with the Indiana State Police decided to reevaluate the original investigation with fresh eyes, focusing not just on new forensic possibilities, but on re-examining the original theories and witness statements with the benefit of hindsight and modern analytical techniques. This meant meticulously going back through every interview, every piece of physical evidence, every potential lead, seeking overlooked details or subtle inconsistencies that might have been missed in the chaos of the initial investigation. The case had seen several renewed efforts over the years, but this particular quiet revisit involved a deeper, more systematic reappraisal of existing data. One of the theories that had been discussed early on, but never fully proven, involved a potential connection between the murders and a local drug network or individuals known for criminal activities in the area. This was not a new theory, but rather a pattern that had been glimpsed and then perhaps subtly set aside in favor of other urgent leads during the initial, overwhelming investigation. The quiet revisit allowed detectives to meticulously cross-reference information from the Burger Chef case with other criminal intelligence that had accumulated over the intervening decades. This was a painstaking process, a quiet dive into the vast archives of criminal history, searching for a shared name, a common location, or a behavioral pattern that might link the Burger Chef crimes to other known individuals or groups. The quiet re-examination led to a renewed focus on several individuals who had been loosely connected to the initial investigation, or who had come to the attention of law enforcement for other reasons in the years that followed. While no single smoking gun piece of evidence emerged, the accumulation of small, previously unnoticed details, when combined with a deeper understanding of the criminal landscape of the late 1970s, began to form a more coherent picture. For example, a theory involving two individuals, Jeffrey W. Reed and Donald Forrester, who were involved in a separate, albeit violent, incident shortly after the Burger Chef murders, gained new relevance. While they were known to have been in the area and had engaged in criminal acts, their direct link to the Burger Chef case remained circumstantial. The key to this quiet reevaluation was the understanding that the individuals who committed such a violent act would likely have left a subtle trail or exhibited similar behaviors in other contexts. Detectives began to see a potential pattern emerge when connecting the Burger Chef crime to other unsolved robberies or acts of violence from that period. This was not a sudden revelation, but a gradual, methodical process of connecting dots that had been too far apart in the initial rush of the investigation. The focus shifted from hoping for a single new piece of physical evidence to painstakingly building a case based on circumstantial connections and behavioral patterns, augmented by the quiet persistence of the detectives. This quiet, strategic shift allowed for the reinterpretation of already existing data, revealing subtleties that had been hidden in plain sight. While the Burger Chef murders, to this day, officially remain unsolved, the quiet revisit of the case has led cold case detectives to develop very strong theories and identify key individuals of interest. Over the years, investigative resources have continued to be allocated, and the focus remains on individuals like Donald Forrester and Jeffrey Reed, who were later connected to other violent crimes and whose names consistently surfaced in reevaluations of the evidence. Although no arrests have been made and no one has been formally charged with the Burger Chef murders, the decades of persistent investigation, including the quiet reevaluation of old theories, have provided a clearer understanding of the potential perpetrators and the circumstances surrounding the tragic night. The case stands as a testament to the enduring commitment of law enforcement, even when the final, undeniable proof remains just out of reach. The case of the Burger Chef murders is a profoundly tragic example of how even a meticulously investigated crime can resist resolution for decades, and how the answers, if they are to be found, might lie in the quiet, patient re-examination of existing information. It highlights the enduring pain of families left without definitive closure, but also the unwavering dedication of cold case detectives who, through the quiet revisiting of forgotten patterns and theories, continue to seek justice. It reminds us that some truths are elusive, But the search for them, like a persistent whisper in the wind, never truly ceases, hoping one day to finally bring peace to a long-haunted community. Our final journey brings us to the quiet, sometimes unnerving, world of unexplained phenomena and the profound impact of unresolved events. This is the story of Tina Risch, a case that became famous for its connection to alleged poltergeist activity, but which, beneath the sensational headlines, held a deeper, more personal mystery rooted in trauma and ultimately a quiet, if tragic, resolution related to a passing. This case is a silent echo of a hidden truth. It was the month of March, in the year 1984. The home of Joan and John Risch in Columbus, Ohio, became the center of bewildering and frightening occurrences. Their adopted daughter, 14-year-old Tina Risch, seemed to be the focal point of what was described as poltergeist activity. Objects would fly off shelves, pictures would fall from walls, and furniture would move on its own accord. The events escalated, causing significant distress to the family and drawing immense media attention. Parapsychologists and paranormal investigators descended upon the home, attempting to document and understand phenomena. The house, once a quiet, ordinary residence, became a whirlwind of unexplained activity, captured in famous photographs and news reports. The media frenzy surrounding the Columbus poltergeist was intense. News crews, reporters, and curious onlookers converged on the Risch home. Tina herself became the subject of widespread fascination and scrutiny. While some observers were genuinely convinced of paranormal activity, others, including skeptical investigators, suspected that Tina herself might be orchestrating some of the events, perhaps unconsciously or as a cry for help. The pressure on the young girl was immense, her life suddenly thrust into an unwanted spotlight, scrutinized by both believers and disbelievers alike. Amidst the chaos of flying objects and flashing cameras, the quiet, underlying emotional distress of a teenage girl was often overlooked, obscured by the sensational nature of the events. In time, the poltergeist phenomena in the Risch home subsided. Tina Risch attempted to return to a more normal life, but the notoriety of the case followed her. She later moved away, attempting to escape the shadow of her past. However, the unusual start to her public life seemed to foreshadow a series of difficulties and tragic events that would unfold in her adult years. The initial mystery of the poltergeist, while never definitively explained, slowly faded from public memory, replaced by the quiet, personal struggles Tina would face. Focus shifted from external forces to the internal turmoil that seemed to haunt her. The quiet echoes of Tina Risch's early life, marked by the poltergeist events and the immense pressure she experienced, would resonate years later in a profoundly tragic way. In the month of April, in the year 2006, Tina Risch, now 36 years old and known by her married name, Tina Boyer, was living in North Carolina. She was a mother herself, attempting to build a stable life. However, her past seemed to catch up to her in a dark and unexpected manner. On April 14, 2006, her 2-year-old daughter, Brittany Boyer, passed away. The circumstances of the child's passing immediately raised suspicions. This was not a quiet, natural passing, and it quickly triggered a criminal investigation. The investigation into Brittany Boyer's passing revealed disturbing details. Medical examinations indicated that the child had sustained severe injuries, inconsistent with an accidental fall or natural causes. This led authorities to suspect foul play. The focus of the investigation quickly turned to Tina Boyer herself, as she was the primary caregiver present at the time of the injuries. The parallels to her earlier life, though not directly related to paranormal events, were subtly drawn by those aware of her past. The media, ever quick to sensationalize, revived her poltergeist girl moniker, casting a new grim shadow over her. This time, however, the focus was not on flying objects, but on a tragic and deeply disturbing human act. The silent breakthrough in Tina Resch's later story, shifting from the mysterious to the grimly human, came through meticulous medical and forensic examination, coupled with a deep dive into the patterns of the domestic environment. While her initial fame was linked to unexplained events, the resolution of this later tragedy relied on the precise, unwavering facts of medical science. The nature of Brittany's injuries, analyzed by experienced medical professionals, provided irrefutable evidence of abuse. This was the quiet, undeniable testimony of the child's body, speaking a truth that could not be dismissed as supernatural. The medical findings indicated chronic and severe physical trauma, not a single isolated accident. The evidence meticulously collected by law enforcement and medical examiners became overwhelming. The pattern of injuries on Brittany, combined with the circumstances of her passing, pointed directly to an individual responsible for her care. Quiet details within the medical reports, the subtle signs of repeated trauma, began to paint a clear picture. The focus was no longer on external, unexplainable forces, but on the very real and heartbreaking internal dynamics of a household. This systematic gathering of scientific and circumstantial evidence laid the foundation for the prosecution. In the year 2007, Tina Boyer was arrested and charged in connection with her daughter Brittany's passing. The arrest brought a tragic and painful end to a life that had begun under unusual circumstances, only to culminate in profound sorrow. The legal proceedings that followed brought to light the full, heartbreaking details of Brittany's suffering. The medical testimony was central to the prosecution's case, detailing the extent of the child's injuries and the conclusion that they were inflicted rather than accidental. This was the quiet, yet devastating, truth finally laid bare for all to hear. In the year 2008, Tina Boyer was found guilty of child abuse, inflicting serious injury and involuntary manslaughter in connection with her daughter's passing. She received a significant sentence, which she is currently serving. This conviction marked a tragic and definitive end to the public narrative of Tina Resch. The case, while initially shrouded in the sensationalism of alleged poltergeist activity, ultimately resolved into a human tragedy, brought to justice through the quiet, diligent work of medical forensics and criminal investigation. The story of Tina Resch, from the Columbus poltergeist to the tragic passing of her child, serves as a poignant and unsettling reminder that sometimes the true mysteries are not those of the supernatural, but the hidden struggles and devastating acts that occur within the quiet corners of human experience. It illustrates how the quiet echoes of past traumas, whether truly paranormal or deeply psychological, can sometimes manifest in unforeseen and tragic ways, and how, ultimately, truth, no matter how painful, will find its way to the light through diligent investigation. It is a somber reflection on the complexities of a life lived under unusual scrutiny and the quiet, enduring sorrow of a profound loss. And so, sleepy detectives, our journey through these quiet breakthroughs comes to a close. We have explored tales where justice, like a patient gardener, nurtured seeds of truth planted decades ago. From overlooked details in old files to the silent whispers of evolving science, each story reminds us that even the most enduring mysteries can yield their secrets. The quiet persistence of dedicated investigators, coupled with the relentless march of technological innovation, ensures that no case is ever truly forgotten. May these quiet revelations bring a measure of peace to the victims and their families, and remind us all that in the pursuit of truth, sometimes the most powerful clues are the ones that wait patiently, silently, for the moment in the light. Until our next quiet investigation, rest easy.